I had always been drawn to the peace of the forest, where I could walk for hours among the rustling leaves, the soft ground beneath my boots, and the quiet beauty of nature. The chirping of birds, the hum of insects, and the occasional flash of fireflies were the soundtrack of my walks. The forest was my escape, my sanctuary, where I could leave behind the chaos of everyday life and just exist among the trees. The serenity it provided was unrivaled, and it felt like a second home. I often ventured out with the plan to stay overnight. Just me, the stars, and the silence of the woods. But one day, something happened that shattered my sense of comfort. I would never see the forest in the same way again. It started like any other trip. I invited my girlfriend Emma to join me on one of these overnight excursions. She had never been camping in the forest, and I thought it would be a nice change of pace for her, an opportunity to disconnect and relax. She hesitated at first, but eventually she agreed. We packed our bags, grabbed the necessary gear, and made our way to the forest. By the time we reached our usual spot, the sky had begun to darken. The air had a crispness to it, and the scent of pine filled the atmosphere. We set up camp, laid out our sleeping bags, and sat down to have a quick dinner. The forest felt odd. It was quieter than usual. Normally, the evening would be filled with the chirps of crickets, the soft calls of owls, and the rustling of small animals. But tonight there was nothing. The silence was unnerving. "Is it just me, or is it unusually quiet?" Emma asked, breaking the stillness. I glanced around, feeling a slight unease settle over me. "It's a little quieter than usual, but it's probably nothing." We didn't talk much after that. We quickly finished our meal, and as the evening shadows deepened, we retreated to the tent, eager to get some sleep. The silence outside seemed to press in on us, making everything feel still and suffocating. As I lay there, staring at the dark canvas of the tent, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Normally, I could hear the forest come alive at night, the rustle of branches, the faint hum of insects, the occasional flutter of wings. But tonight, nothing, not a sound. I turned over, trying to ignore the unsettling silence, and finally drifted into a restless sleep. The stillness of the night was shattered by a sudden shaking of the tent. I shot awake, heart pounding in my chest. Emma was shaking me, her face pale and wide-eyed with fear. Jake, there's someone out there," she whispered, her voice trembling. I sat up, instantly alert, adrenaline coursing through my veins. "What do you mean, someone?" I asked, my voice low, trying to keep calm. I don't know," she stammered. "I heard footsteps. Someone's walking around the tent. I don't know what to do." A cold dread washed over me. I quickly reached for my gun, which I always kept within arm's reach while camping. I didn't usually expect to need it, but after a few close calls with wildlife in the past, it had become a precaution I never ignored. My hands shook as I strained to listen. The forest was silent again, the air thick with an unnatural stillness. I could hear nothing except for the pounding of my own heartbeat. Then I heard it, a faint rustling, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, circling the tent. The footsteps were soft, muffled by the underbrush, but unmistakably human. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. Who could be out here? And why would they be walking around our tent at this hour? My grip tightened on the gun, and I motioned for Emma to stay quiet. "Do you hear that?" I whispered. She nodded, her eyes wide with terror. I strained my ears, listening intently. The footsteps continued, moving in a slow, methodical circle around us. They were getting closer. I felt a surge of fear, my hands trembling. This wasn't just some lost hiker or animal. The way the person was circling the tent, moving with purpose, felt wrong. I could feel my breath quickening as I waited for the footsteps to stop. And then, they did. The sudden silence was worse than the footsteps themselves. It felt like the air had thickened, like the forest itself was holding its breath. I held my own, waiting, listening. For what? I didn't know. The seconds stretched on, each one feeling like an eternity. Suddenly, we heard a cutting sound. Someone was slowly unzipping the tent's zipper. I nearly jumped out of my skin, the fear consuming me. I pulled my gun out and aimed it at the entrance of the tent. "I'm armed," I called out, my voice shaky but loud. "Stay back. I will shoot if you don't leave." The noise stopped abruptly. I held my breath. The only sound now, the frantic beating of my heart. My finger was on the trigger, ready to act. Then, as quickly as it had started, I heard footsteps retreating into the darkness, moving away from the tent. It sounded like someone running, but it wasn't the heavy, chaotic running of a panicked person. No, this was purposeful, calculated, like they knew exactly where they were going. I waited for what felt like an eternity before I dared to speak again. "Is it gone?" Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. I nodded, still tense, still listening for any signs of movement. After a long moment of silence, I slowly unzipped the tent. We quickly packed our things, my heart still hammering in my chest. We didn't say much as we gathered our gear, each of us too afraid to speak. Once everything was packed, we hurriedly made our way back through the dark forest, not looking back. The next day, we learned the chilling truth. The local authorities had reported that a man had been murdered in the forest the night we were there. They didn't know who had done it, but they suspected the killer had been hiding in the woods, watching. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The footsteps we had heard, the slow circling of our tent, were no accident. The killer had been watching us, perhaps waiting for the right moment to strike. The forest, which had once been my peaceful sanctuary, now felt like a dark, ominous place. I could never walk there again without remembering the terror of that night, and the feeling that something or someone was always watching, waiting, just beyond the trees.